So I guess we can go and get started, huh? It's going to be, we're going to fly through this. I think we have 30 minutes and 5 minutes of Q&A, so we'll move pretty quickly. But I think it's a topic near and dear, I think, to both of our hearts. We've spent a lot of time dealing with contracts, mostly myself on the technology front for many years, and Nancy on pretty much both, I think.
Yeah, I think, as I mentioned, we've outsourced a lot of procurement, and I've worked at Symantec for almost 10 years, but in the last 4 to 5 years, we've really heartily been managing our outsourced partners and then focusing on contract management. So that's really my role as contract manager for North America, and working on a global scale with my counterparts in other regions. So we have a few things that we've learned, and through that process, I've also learned quite a bit through the mergers and acquisitions. I love that discussion because I can really relate to it. So
all right.
Anyway, we might as well get
Let's
started.
Go.
So yeah, just to kind of set the stage here, we're going to kind of ask a few questions too, because we need to understand where you feel that you're at in the contract management space, because there's certainly best in class. Any contract management is better than no contract management, but there's different levels, of course. And I know for Symantec, it's taken us well over a decade to kind of get there. I wouldn't say we are completely best in class, but I feel like we have a contract management tool, we have a lot of our processes that run through that tool, and we have a little bit more close-knit compliance and working with the business on following that process. So I think we're doing pretty well.
And I would say from a Charles Schwab standpoint, or actually a number of companies I've worked at, American Express, Charles Schwab, AAA Insurance, Delphi Automotive, just to name a few. But I think, from a contract management standpoint, I think when you talk about, and as Nancy's saying, best in class, where are you at in your organization? I think that's kind of the thing we'd like you to kind of think about right now. Where do I think I am from a contract management standpoint? Do I feel that in my mind I'm best in class, or do I feel that I have some work to do, or do I feel I have a lot of work to do? So hopefully through this, maybe we can give you some takeaways so you can go home and say, back to the office tomorrow and say, okay, these are things I want to kind of go after, and these are areas to help me move towards that kind of best in class model. So I would say out of all the companies I worked at, none of them are best in class. I think that we could always improve. Maybe we're doing a good job of capturing a contract in the database, but we're not doing a good job of getting the contracts from the department. So we'll talk more about that in a minute. So. Oh, yeah.
Excuse me?
Who?
I think Symantec is pretty, I wouldn't say we're the best in class, but I would like to believe, and maybe you can tell me when we're done, because we'll talk about what we're doing.
Yeah, and I think from talking with Nancy, out of what I've seen in all the companies, I think Symantec's well on their way. You're definitely,
we're on our way,
definitely close, if not there already. So.
Right, and as Mark mentioned, there's always room for improvement, but I think it's just really key to get the processes and the tools working together. Because if you have processes without tools, or tools without processes, it just seems to fall apart no matter how hard you actually work at it. So that's something that we've learned. So we'll
talk about that. Yep.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
So just, Symantec, I think most of you know who we are. We're a security company. We are the 5th largest software company in the world. A lot of people don't know that. We have annual sales of $6.9 billion. We're most notably known for our Norton products, which is on what used to be called the consumer side. We have a new CEO, and we're no longer allowed to say consumer versus enterprise, because there's many levels in between, and Norton products are good for other businesses as well. So $6.9 billion in sales. Our spend, indirect spend, is $3.9 billion. We have spend under management of 77%. I think the best-in-class number there is 85%. I'm really impressed with HP at 95%. But one note of sort of explanation there for us is Symantec buys a lot of technology that we incorporate into our product, and then we resell. So that has all this royalty payment component. And anyway, I'm sure our spend under management would be at 85% if it wasn't for all the product side, because procurement doesn't manage that process.
All right. So I'll talk a little bit about myself, the companies I work for. Obviously, Charles Schwab, so think most of you know who Charles Schwab is, but we're a leading provider of financial services. We have more than 300 offices, 9 million active brokerage accounts, 1.6 million corporate retirement plan participants, about 918,000 banking accounts, 2.12 trillion client assets as of July 31st. Annual sales around 6.9, and we're revenue somewhere around 5 billion, close to 5 billion. So that's the company I work for. I mentioned ISM Arizona just because I'm the president of ISM Arizona local ISM chapter. We have over 300 members, and we have monthly dinner meetings and events and a number of different seminars, CPSM training, all the things. So I try to give back to the industry in regards to my free time in helping educate our members and people in the procurement field. So just something I do when I'm not at the office. So. Okay, so just kind of going through a list of things we'll go over, and we started going into some of those already, some good items. Using contracts as a risk mitigation tool, standardizing your contracts. We're going to align global contract management processes. We're going to look for spotting errors or inconsistencies in your contracts, and contract management tools. So those are kind of the items we're going to run through here, and we'll go ahead and start into them. So, Nancy?
Okay, let me get to the right page of my notes. Yep, sorry about that.
No problem.
We're on using contracts as a
Yeah, using contracts as a risk mitigation tool. So, difference between looking at the contract versus the PO.
Okay, my notes look a little bit different. Okay, so first of all, we want to know when we use a contract versus PO terms and conditions because, I know years ago, the direction from legal was if you have an engagement with a supplier and we're spending $100,000 or more a year, you should really be entering into a full-blown contract. And, we find that, if you're ordering off-the-shelf standard items, widgets, and it doesn't really necessitate, there's no services, they're not coming on site, there's no implementation, there's really no risk associated, it really shouldn't matter. So I would definitely, make sure your buyers are trained in that, to have a good eye of when PO terms and conditions would be sufficient. Now, conversely, on the contract side, we found that our marketing department has a really hearty appetite for hiring suppliers like lead generators and all kinds of services that, there's all kinds of private and customer data that is collected and viewed. And so you could have a $10,000 hosting agreement, and that is the one that's going to bite you. And we've actually had an experience with that at Symantec, but that was years ago, and we've tightened things up since then. So, but yeah, it's really important that your buyers are fully trained and understand where the level of risk is and to make sure you have the right contract in place.
Yeah, and so, engagement letters, I don't know if any of you have ever signed up for those or been pushed by a vendor to do an engagement letter of some sort. Normally it shows up, right, end of month, end of quarter, end of year, sale's going to go away, deal's going to go away. Let's just put this quick engagement letter in place, and then we'll be good, and then you can get us a PO whenever, or you can finish the contract whenever. As long as we get that, we can do our rev rec, and we're good to go, right? So I think, the one thing around that from a technology standpoint, from a sourcing technology standpoint, we're going to avoid that altogether, right? So we're going to try to stay away from any type of engagement letters. They just cause more friction, more trouble. Just, the reality is your vendor needs to hold your discounts as long as you need to get the deal done. And my motto or what I say to the vendors is, look, the deal's going to get done when the deal gets done. You guys may spend 3 weeks on reviewing a contract before you bring it back to us, and then you want to keep us to this deadline date of the end of the month, but it took you 3 weeks, now you're giving me 2 days. So I'll tell you what, anytime you take three weeks, then every day you're late, you extension for another day. So then by the time I get it back, we got another 3 or 4 weeks to get it done. Now they're going to tell you they can't do that, but I think the point is stay away from the engagement letter and focus on getting the deal done when the deal can get done. and I would just avoid them. So if you're signing up for those, I would try to stop that, because you're just causing yourself a lot more work, a lot more. You may still have to go to legal and get this engagement letter signed off on anyway. Why not have legal just focus on helping you get the deal done, and push the vendor to give you the time you need. So.
Knowing when to use a vendor's contract form. Just wanted to get kind of a quick idea. If your organization has their own contract templates to any degree, can you hold up your hand?
How many have your own templates?
Awesome. Okay.
More than 10? More than 10?
More than 10
All
contract
right.
templates?
Wow.
Good. So you've got a pretty mature, that's excellent. You know, over time we've kind of done the same thing. We've got about 12 or 13 contract forms. Now there's times, right, when you need to sign up to a vendor form. And, you know, the reason I bring this up is a lot of our buyers get bogged down in this, right? Especially, you know, we've outsourced, and so things become sort of black and white to the partners that are performing these tasks. So they say, well, Symantec's position is always use semantic form first. You know, that is our first position, use our form. But if it's an event, you know, if it's a subscription service for, you know, and there's no services associated with it, you know, no special services are not coming on site, there's no added risk. If the engagement doesn't really lend itself to using our form, then don't push our form, you know. So, and what we do, is particularly like on the event side, and there might be those of you here that do the same thing, is we have our legal comes up with an addendum. So it isn't an amendment. We're not amending the contract, but we're telling the venue or the hotel or whatever that, okay, we'll sign up to your contract form, but we're going to addendum in some protections for us. And a lot of times that has to do with making terms mutual, right? We can't change the terms because we're just doing the addendum blindly, so we're just kind of making those terms mutual.
Yeah, and I think, you know, just when you think about that, I mean, I think the goal is obviously to try to use your templates, as we discussed. Not always going to be the case, but if you make it the habit, and if you haven't worked with your legal department yet, or you're not at that point, I mean, even just start with the NDA, because I found that with different companies I worked at that didn't have that set up, where they had all these templates, that I just started with the NDA. How about I sit down with the legal department and we just work together to get a base NDA in place that's mutual, that I can use in my position for now, and then that slowly builds into, hey, by the way, that's working out really, you know, test it for a little bit, because some companies have a real, you know, from a cultural standpoint, they may have a real issue with, no, we don't do that here. That's not what legal does. We haven't done these standard agreements, you know. So some companies really have a strange culture on that, you know. So you're trying to educate them as well as get to the end goal, which is to have those contract forms. So you know, spend the time, get the NDA as kind of the first run, get the mutual NDA put in place, and get started there. And then once that's successful, after 4 or 5 engagements, then you go back and say, hey, that worked really well. How about we now have a conversation about getting the master services agreement or master purchase agreement, or, you know, whatever it is in place as the next one, and just kind of work your way through them. Or at that point, maybe have a conversation with them. Hey, that worked really well. How about we just put, you know, 5 or so of these in place? I think it's really going to help us.
Absolutely, and that kind of leads into the next bullet here about creating a contract playbook. If you've got your standard forms, and, you know, we worked with our legal really hard to get those forms, and, you know, they help us regularly update them. So the playbook, show of hands of those who have contract playbooks. It's kind of a guide to help your buyers. We got a couple of people in the room that have some contract playbooks. You know, I think it's really beneficial to have this, because, you know, it's always going to give you your first position, right? These are our most, you know, these are our favored clauses. This is what we prefer. You know, we want $2 million worth of umbrella. We want $1 million in professional liability. We want all this stuff. Well, in the reality of it, maybe the engagement doesn't really need it. But so the playbook is excellent because it provides the buyer a tool to go through and figure out, you know, okay, this is my first position. What can I negotiate? What can be my second position? What can be my third position? Without going to legal to get those approved. Naturally, when you're changing certain sections of the contract, you're going to have to go to business units like tax and treasury and risk and so on too. But that can also be something that's handled in the playbook. having contacts for all of those internal business unit approvers would also be in the playbook.
Certificate of insurance.
Well, collecting this, so it's interesting. Yeah, I mean, we have insurance requirements. We don't go collect certificates of insurance ourselves. I don't know what other companies do. I think our group that does subcontracting, where all of that, as all those subcontractors are going on our customer site, I think, and then, you know, I don't know.
At our company, as part of the procurement function, we collect this
You do?
certificate of
Okay.
insurance as part of the process.
Yeah.
So it's
Excuse me?
determining.
Well, I think the buyer, okay, so in our, right, so in our organization, the buyer is the voice to the supplier, and
Right.
when that, the supplier says, well, you know, I can't meet that $1 million, you know, I have a $500,000 policy, I'm not going to get a larger policy just for Symantec.
Right.
Then what I would do, or what the buyer would do, is take that to our risk department and say, this is the engagement, this is what we're paying for the services, this is the, you know, this is what they're doing, and then they approve whether we can accept that or not.
I think the hope of the playbook is to get to a point where that playbook, it's kind of the next step when you talk about this evolution to getting best in class. I think the playbook is after you've now got your 10 or 12 or whatever it is set contracts in place, now start focusing your efforts on getting that playbook. Because once you have that playbook, now you're going to be able to say, okay, I have the playbook in place, and that's going to support maybe 1 or 2 rounds of my team working with the vendor prior to getting legal engaged, because legal's already said, yeah, you can go back with these 2 rounds in these sections within the contracts. You can go back with those responses, and as long as the vendor agrees, when you go back to legal, it's, yeah, they didn't agree to the first round, but they agreed to the second. Here's all the things they agreed to, and then you've kind of cut down the time where you're engaging legal, and you've cut down the time for legal to have to, you know, be involved, which is, you know, obviously a lot of cost for them. It's also time-wise, hopefully the goal for you, I mean the goal for us from a procurement standpoint and sourcing standpoint is really to reduce our amount of time that we're having to go through an engagement, right? Instead of dropping in legal's lap and then having to have 4 or 5 back and forth with the vendor, maybe 2 or 3 calls, who knows where it ends up, but the thought is to try to prevent that. So that's where the playbook kind of starts to come into play there.
And there's certainly an investment of time and energy on, you know, the procurement leaders and the legal staff to train the buyers, right? You can't just like create this playbook and then throw it at them and say, you know, go ahead and use this the next time you negotiate a contract. You do have to have some of the training and then upkeep, you know, touch base with them. Our legal department has like a, I don't even know what they call it. It's like on a monthly basis. It's just kind of like a lunch sort of meeting. You know, you just talk about current things. You have questions. Do you need help with legal? Just general questions. And then, you know, if you feel that you need some help with that playbook, you know, you can bring it up at that time.
Yeah, I think having the monthly meeting or quarterly or whatever it is with your legal department is a great way to kind of grow that relationship, as well as, you know, we need them, right? And we need finance, we need legal. So I mean, we want to have a good relationship with them, and I think all of you know that. But it's just getting that cadence with them is very beneficial, and you can bring these type of things up in those conversations and gain agreement and understanding that you know, having these type of things in place down the road would be very, very beneficial for both parties within the organization. So.
Another element on risk mitigation that, you know, he and I were talking about that I thought was really important is who in the room, raise your hand if you have like a preferred supplier list or an approved supplier list that you give your stakeholders. You do? Okay.
Oh, yeah, this is a good one.
Okay. So you give your stakeholders, you say, like at Symantec, we say, okay, this is our process. If the purchase is over $25,000 and the supplier that you want to choose is not on the approved supplier list, you must enter a procurement intake form, which happens to be, we can talk about it later, but it happens to be as part of our tool that we use.
Right.
That kind of kicks off that process. So the key here, though, is if you have approved suppliers, a couple things. Once you put them on the approved supplier list, don't just leave them there. You need to make sure that you scrub that list, update it, take them off, put them on, that sort of thing. It's really easy to put them on the approved supplier list and leave them there.
Yeah. I think the big risk, too, that comes up, we talk about, you know, when we're talking about using contracts as a risk mitigation tool, one of the things you have to be really careful with, right? You put them in as a preferred supplier, and the department comes in and says, hey, we put them on as a preferred supplier. We want to go do they're going to do the statement of work for us, and they're going to come in, and they're going to do these things, and you're going, oh, no, we signed a purchase, it was for product. This isn't for services. No, we don't have a services agreement. Well, but you said they're a preferred vendor. What's the... So I think that's one of the things that, you want to kind of be cautious of from a pitfall that you can run into with, make sure I would state it if you're having a list or something you're sharing with that group or you're just reviewing with them on a basis internal, that you have down, here's exactly what type of things you can buy today as a preferred vendor versus, because I think sometimes that might be missed, and then what happens is now they're coming to you saying, they're a preferred vendor, I want to buy. What's the problem? What do you mean it's going to take 3 months to work through a legal contract? I thought we had a contract. So just, I think that communication with your business and clients internally is important because that can run you into some headaches there. And all of a sudden now you're not looked at as value add because you're slowing the process. And I thought this preferred supplier thing was going to help us move things along quicker. So.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, that's something that can be managed in a tool. Something, your approved supplier list is, in the tool. They're marked as approved supplier, but you mark them as at a commodity basis and then a sub-commodity level. You can certainly take it down as far as you want to go and then do some reporting out of there for your stakeholders. We provide our approved supplier list, update it monthly, and put it on our internal website for our stakeholders. So it gets to be pretty helpful.
Yeah. So, time to standardize.
Yeah, we talked about this already, how, it's pretty important to have your own templates wherever possible. And again, the time saved in redlining your contract form for your resources is going to be a lot less than trying to add in all of your favorite terms and conditions and redlining a vendor form.
Yeah, and I think one thing, I just want to mention, we talked the last slide a little bit about that risk mitigation, and now you're getting standardizing contracts. But I think, there's a piece in here, when I think about it from a technology side, this always comes up. Our technology teams always want to go and test and trial products. I mean, it's an everyday event for me. I get a call, and it's, hey, we got the perfect product. We're ready to trial it. Vendor said they'll do it at no cost. We want to get started tomorrow. What do you think? They said I should come see you and see what your thoughts are before we go forward, and I want to make sure we know what we need to do. So we're ready to try out what's next, and so I think that's one of the things, you really got to be cautious of is, how much, I guess how many of you in the room are aware of, I know, if you raise your hands, I'd be very impressed. How many of you in the room here have the ability to know all of the trial, let's just say hardware, and we could say printers, or we could say desktops, laptops, servers. You're aware of all of that that's being trialed or tested in your organization today? Maybe one? Okay. So one of the dangers, in this contracting conversation is, you want to have a trial agreement in place with all the products you're trialing in the organization. And I think one of the dangers when we talk about these vendors coming into these POCs, what do we all know what that is, right? That's take the keys, test drive the car, take it for a week, come back, and guess what? Make sure you tell me if you like the color, if you like the sunroof, if it drives nice, how's the steering, does it brake well? So anyway, are you ready to buy the car? And what's the one conversation that never come up? And I'm big into negotiations, right? So that's what this is all about for all of us. This is what we do, really the core of what we do. You haven't talked about the price yet. And most of my clients will say to me, well, I asked them for budgetary numbers. I made sure not to negotiate with the vendor. And, the reality of it is you never found out what the real price of the product is, and you're going and going to test and trial this product for the organization. I tell them, forget the budgetary stuff. If you're going to go talk to them about a trial, at least if I can't get in front of you to talk to them, at least make them guarantee they give you a discounted price and show you the list, discount, and final amount of what you're going to pay for that product. Because that all goes back to these contracts and putting that trial agreement in place. And part of the trial agreement discussion is making sure you're locking in things like, you know, how much would this cost if I had to buy it when I'm done with the trial? How long is the trial for, right? Because the last thing we want, which is the call I've gotten over the years, is in different companies, and I won't say which company it was, but the call was, the vendor came in and said it's going to be $600,000 for this server, and I don't understand how it could cost that much, and it never would have cost us that much. But anyway, what we found out was it's managing a lot of our production systems, and I can't really pull it out, and I can't find a contract, and I don't think we ever bought it. I think it was a trial item that somehow got in our environment somehow, so I'm not sure how it got there. So this is where it's so important. I think the people in the room that are doing a good job of this, obviously, it's one of those things we kind of tend to forget about, or we just don't have a lot of time to mess with it. But I think making sure that you're getting in front of all these trials and things that come, it's ultimately sales, right? It's ultimately the sales guy trying to win business and trying to go around all of us. So how do we, you know, make sure we can get in front of that is at least make sure you have the trial agreement. Make sure you have a number of things, you know, listed in that trial agreement to talk about all, you know, how long this trial, when it's going to be completed, all those other things. Because at least if you end up with it in your environment, you know, 6 months down the road or 8 months down the road, at least you can go back to the vendor and say, well, I do have a trial agreement here that says it was a 30-day trial. I mean, did you ask for it back, or do we have something that happened that said you know, or, you know, obviously it accidentally stayed here. But at least, well, if we get in a situation where they won't take it back, at least we can say, well, I know the cost is only going to be this much. It's only going to be $30,000 because $30,000 is what it said in the trial. That's what I would pay if I had to buy it. So that's where this trial agreement kind of conversation comes into play. But try to keep away from these you know, test trial my car. I try to say put it in a RFP or competitive RFX process and do it as part of that process. I think that's the goal we all try to accomplish, but that doesn't always happen. But if nothing else, make sure, you know, I try to get in a room with that vendor early on and negotiate that piece of it to say, yeah, all right, as part of this trial agreement, what's the real price we're going to pay? Tell me the list discount. You know, get in all those conversations and then get it in writing. And at least you know, if nothing else, if you do move forward, you're in a better position than you were before. So.
Okay, we're going to skip down to the bottom bullet because we already addressed the one above that. And then we can kind of, I think we need to kind of go a little bit quicker, but it's so easy to talk about all this stuff. So minimizing gotcha risky clause, I'm sure that all of us have experienced. You know, you inherit agreement, you go through it, and you're like, geez, who signed up to this? You know, and then you see it signed by a vice president or senior vice president. You're like, oh my God, what are we thinking? I know working on the M&A team in procurement, you know, God, you wouldn't believe the stuff that we acquired. We've had some pretty large acquisitions. Probably our largest was VeriSign, the authentication business unit. We didn't buy the whole company. So, you know, it's incredible when you look and see what other companies have signed up to. Probably the one that has got us the most, and you may be able to relate to this, are the auto-renew clauses. You know, Symantec's you know, our default position is we do not sign up for any auto-renewal under any circumstance unless, of course, you know, there is some sort of, you know, really good deal, you know, you buy 2 or 3 years or something at a time. But the auto-renew is just awful. We have to have notice. We have to be able to say that we want to renew or we don't want to renew. And you can certainly negotiate termination fees if it is the type of service to warrant termination fees. If, you know, you're just so integrated and it's going to, you know, make sure you have a transition plan and a transition, exhibit on your contract. If, you know, you're going to terminate that contract, you want to make sure you get your data back. You want to make sure that they're going to work with you to get your information and data back. If you don't have that included when you do the termination, then that can be a really big problem.
I think the one that jumps out at me all the time is the payment terms, especially in IT for software, right? It's, well, we're at the end of at the end of the term, it's a 3% increase, 4% increase, 5%, who knows? But there's some type of increase at the end once you come out of the initial term. Obviously, we all know you got to try to lock that in early, lock it in as part of negotiating these deals. And I always say, and if you guys haven't done this, I would say, CPI, if you're going to really go down the path, CPI, Consumer Price Index, or if you're going to then pick your number, 1%, 2%, 3%. I wouldn't go above 3 and say lesser of the two, so lesser of the two, and hopefully you can land on, you know, CPI, and for now that's pretty good. But I see all too often the vendors slap a 3% increase yearly on, and half the time people aren't paying attention to it. So it's an easy win for us if we can have that conversation with the vendor, because you're going to get them to move on it. Because what's their argument? I'm doing extra things for you. I'm, you know, it's just a cash cow for them. I mean, it's just free money. So, fight the increases, these basic increases. Especially if you just signed a 1-year contract and then you're considered year 2 being out of the term, you know. So now all of a sudden the contract that you signed, maybe it got missed. Maybe legal has a standard template that says it's 3% no matter what, or 4% no matter what, and you just pushed it out to the vendor and missed that. You know, your team member sent it out to the vendor and you missed that it was automatic 3%. You know, well, start at 0 or start at 1 or start at something, but you know, make sure you're negotiating that. I think some people miss that, and then later you're paying that increase and you're wondering how to get caught up in that. So from a contract standpoint, I think, you know, the piece is, you know, keep an eye on these contracts and what's going in them as the deal. You know, we may negotiate a great deal up front, but that contract could trump that later on. Yeah, let's move. Global.
I love this picture. Aligning global contract management processes. We've worked really hard at this one in Symantec because we always told the stakeholders that we have a global process, but in reality we did not have a global process because, you know, EMEA is special because they have 22 instances of Oracle for one for every country, and therefore blah, blah, blah. So anyway, long and short of it is we work really, really hard, and we now meet regularly with our global counterparts. We have, as I said, we've been outsourced primarily, so we have category leads and managers. I'm a services category manager and a contracts category manager, so I meet with my counterparts in EMEA and APJ. We make sure that we're in alignment, and we make sure that we're taking advantage of global agreements. Let me give you an example here. Symantec has an enterprise level agreement with Microsoft, and we true up at the end of the year. And so we pay a lot of money for our Microsoft licenses. They are all internally implemented. Basically, we have a process where internal customers will come through a different portal to request Microsoft software, and then it actually gets deployed by IT and not procurement because we don't have to go pay for it. They're the ones that are keeping track of how many we're releasing. We found out from our APJ counterparts that they were told by Microsoft that in order to buy a Microsoft product in that country, whatever country it was in APJ, they had to have a select agreement. Those of you that have purchased Microsoft know that that's just an alternative business agreement, a select agreement. You select the reseller of who you're going to go through, and then you get your special favored pricing directly from Microsoft. So the enterprise level agreement, you know, you get everything, right? And then the select agreement, you're paying by the drink. So you have to issue a PO under the select agreement. So we found out that we were overpaying for licenses. You know, I don't even remember how much money it was, but it was a lot of money. And it was a very expensive lesson. So really aligning global processes and working with counterparts, making sure that you are, you're processing under global agreements. You're not creating new agreements locally unless you absolutely have to. Now, in some cases, you might have a global agreement, but it might exclude a country or two. I mean, we have a couple that are like that, too. So, and again, it gets back to, we're going to talk about the tool in a minute, but having that contract management tool that identifies what truly is a global agreement versus just regional specific or country specific. So spotting inconsistencies or errors in your contracts, I think we sort of touched on a little bit of some of the risk component, but you know, At Semantic, security is our brand. So we frequently audit our contracts just to make sure that they have the information security and data privacy language that it needs. You know, that was something very important for us to remediate. You might go through your contracts and see, oh, well, you know, the insurance requirements aren't high enough, or, you know, other sections of the contract are just not your current terms and conditions that are coming out of legal. You have to be able to prioritize to mitigate any risks there to see if you want to remediate. You want to go this way?
Yeah, I mean, you know, I think making sure you include other changes when you're putting the contracts in place is important, right? So, you know, if there's a chance to open up an agreement, make changes, that's a good thing to do at that time, and address any changes within the legal group that you want to put in, or anything in your group that you're trying to put in that contract. I think the thing to be really careful about here is, you know, it's like opening up a can of worms, right? I mean, once that contract's open, it can get ugly. So I think the one takeaway I would say in this that I've run into over the years, and I'm sure a lot of you have as well, is, you know, you're trying to get a purchase made, and you take the contract up, you know, you tell the legal department, I'm ready to make a purchase, and they said, oh, well, that contract's 5 years old, and you say, yeah, so we need to make a purchase. We made 20 this year already. What's the issue? Well, we now want to make these 3 or 4 changes, and we now, you know, so that becomes a real issue, right? Because you're trying to make a purchase, you're trying to move forward, and now you're caught up in this, and your client's getting upset because they thought they could just make a purchase, and now they're in a 3-month cycle of a contract can of worms negotiation of both sides wanting to add new language. So I think that's one of the things I would say is kind of one of those pitfalls or things to be careful with. You know, try to find a way to make sure that you have that communication, as we discussed earlier, with your legal organization, so that it's not we get to open up the contract anytime you go to purchase something with it. It's more of a proactive process. You know, it's more of a, okay, so there's certain vendors we want to open up the contract with. When do we want to do that this year? How do we do it without affecting the current business we're doing? Is it really high risk? Who's the, right, it's always about who has the most risk. So is it so much risk that, you know, I'm taking on all this risk and I need to make those changes? Or is it, hey, we can make the order, we're okay, let's address it later. Even if sometimes, I don't know if some of you have, we have like a risk memo letter, we can get the organization to sign in and say, we'll go address these items later. So I don't know if you do any type of risk memo letters or something within your business units to say, look, if you really want this today, I can get that for you today, but there's these 3 things that still need addressed in the contract, and you're going to have to sign up for that risk if the business is signing contracts. I know some of you actually sign them in procurement, but you may still do some type of risk letters with your business group. So that's just one of the things I would say as a takeaway, to kind of plan out how you want to manage that, because that can become a real problem. I mean, it can really cause a lot of stir within your group in trying to support the organization when you have these contracts that are constantly being opened up every time you try to make a purchase. Or, you know, there's this new whatever, some type of, your organization does an internal audit, and now all of a sudden, you know, they want to change this thing in every contract. Well, great, but we're not going to open up every contract today, and we're not going to stop every single purchase to make that change unless it's something that's going to really put a ton of risk on us. So.
Good. I want to make sure that we have time for Q&A here, so I think we have 5 minutes left is all.
Okay.
Can we just go to contract management tools? We'll just do
we're
1
there.
minute there. Are we there?
I'm right with you.
Okay, benefits of a single repository. So there's just a couple of things here. Raise your hands if you do have a single repository. I don't care if it's SharePoint or, excellent, okay, awesome. So there's definitely a benefit to having a single repository. I know for us, we thought we had a single repository until we found out what we didn't have. So
wait, if you said you had a single repository and you said you don't have all your contracts in one place, no, and you're best in class, wait a minute.
Yeah,
Are you best in class?
Yeah.
So some of the takeaways, right? Am I best in class? You know, if I have my contracts in one place, you're getting close, right?
Oh, absolutely. And if anybody says, oh, yeah, we have all of our contracts in one place, you know, well, I would, you know, we should have. We use Aptus, which is a plugin to Salesforce.com, and we use that for from the procurement initiation request all the way to the very end, and uploading the contract, and then sending out automatic notifications when the contracts are coming up for renewal. So that's a real benefit. And we can also track estimated savings in the tool, and it has all kinds of bells and whistles that we haven't used yet.
I mean, there's
So-
a number of tools out there, if any of you, I mean, I remember years ago, Hummingbird, Oracle has contract. I mean, there's a number of companies out there that have these contract database. Some people do use can use SharePoint to an extent if you don't have the money to invest in the other tools. But I think the important piece is getting in that. And then I think the other piece of that is, so what are you doing on the other end of that? If you are capturing your contracts, what are you doing with the business units to make sure that you have process, procedure, policy in place to make sure those contracts are getting to you? And if you're not getting them, have you put something in place to maybe audit the groups yearly or have some conversation with them yearly? Say, hey, by the way, I know that I hadn't seen any contracts from your group lately, and I know we've signed some deals. Can we get those over to us? So we got to get those in the database and get those tracked. And then I think the hierarchy, which can become a real problem. Sometimes people dump everything in a database and have no parent-to-child relationship, right? And then it's like, well, now I'm going to spend the next hour digging through trying to figure out which contract with that vendor is actually the one that we're working off of. Wasn't there an amendment? I mean, in technology, it's really tough, right? I won't say the vendor's name, but we have 52 contracts. So we have a master and we have 40 plus amendments. Well, which one really is the one, and which piece of each one play? So I would say put on your vendors as well. Play the vendors to your advantage where you can. Have them send you the contracts. And I know a lot of people say, well, I don't want to ask them that. Then they'll think I don't have the contracts. Forget about it. Don't worry about that. Tell the vendor, I need the contracts as part of my engagement with you, our relationship. Part of what you need to do is report. You need to give me a copy. And actually bring your team in and walk me through each contract and tell me, put a binder together and walk me through every contract and tell me what's in them, tell me what they're about. Actually do a high-level summary, tell me what's in each one, and have that by next Wednesday because we're going to meet on it and we're going to talk about it. Don't be afraid to challenge your vendors and say, I'm just I'm comparing this, I'm getting them in our relationship, it's important. And half the time I find out that the sales account managers don't even understand what contracts they have. They call me next week, I didn't realize you guys had a contract with XYZ company. You bought them, right? Yeah. Oh, I didn't even know you had a contract. Well, yeah, we do. So why don't you get them all together so we can manage the contracts properly? So don't be afraid to challenge your vendors to give you what you need so you can manage it from a number of fronts, right? You're managing internally and on other fronts as well.
Okay, it
That's
looks
it.
like we're out of time. Can we take 2 minutes, 3 minutes for questions?
Okay.
Yeah?
Thank you.
Thank you. Sorry, we went.
let's
When
do
you got
some
two
Q&A.
speakers, it's kind of hard.
Yeah, we tried to manage the best we could.
Did we answer all your questions, or is there a question?
I knew there was a good reason why I gave her the mic. Sorry,
No,
sorry,
my question
Nancy.
is, it sounded like you have a pretty robust contract management repository that your senior buyers are purchasing from, and you have the playbooks. What we found is we have 4 shared services centers in different parts of the world, and so they still revert back to the PO terms and conditions. And so probably about every 3 months, I'm updating my PO terms and conditions. For instance, they weren't signing trademark agreements when they used our logo in multiple places. And so now I put little notes on, you must check your brand book specifications and adhere to them. And so I've been just constantly reliving my PO terms and conditions. Are you doing the same, or are you focusing more on the MSAs?
Well, that's a good question. We do update PO terms and conditions pretty frequently, but when it comes, if there's a brand, trademark sort of requirement, we're really sticky on that, and we have a brand department. We have in our standard contract, we say you cannot use anything, you can't, the only thing you can do is put Symantec on your customer list. You can't use our logo, you can't do anything else. So if there is a brand, it has to be in a master agreement to be addressed. It's not addressed in our PO terms and conditions. Well, it's addressed in a default position that says you can't use it.
Yeah, I can't say that over my career I saw that we're constantly changing PO terms. I would say we're spending more time on making sure that. Yeah, I can tell you out of the companies I worked for, that's. I mean, you may update it on a yearly or every 18 months, something like that. But I don't know about changing PO terms every.
Yeah, I would
month,
find a way
week.
to make sure that they are using for something like that. I would make sure they use a contract.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Thank you.
That's a problem.
Any other questions? Oh. Sam said, you want to switch? You want all right. Hand off, baton, we can get.
Stephen at the International Baccalaureate. You made a good point earlier on about the different types of systems that you can use as a repository for all of your contract information and managing the process. we use Oracle Advanced Procurement as a single instance. And if anybody would like to just connect up and talk about their experience, if anybody else is using Oracle, I'd be happy to meet up.
Yeah, thanks. I know back, and this is a little while ago, I don't even know if Hummingbird's still around because I haven't looked at their tool recently, but I know Hummingbird, in the tool I was looking at, the company I was at had Hummingbird, they had it for years, and they were tracking all contracts in there, and then what I found was there was a tool that could link the contracts from Hummingbird into SharePoint. So like if you were just using SharePoint, then when you were in SharePoint, it would show the contract in there, but it was just, it was really pointing you back to the Hummingbird tool, but it was built within SharePoint. So there's some different things you can do if you have challenge around costs and you're trying to figure out how can I manage this. I'm just using SharePoint today. You know, there are some things you can do around that, as well as if you do have a contract database and you want to use SharePoint still to do other things, you can kind of build that relationship there as well.
Okay, I think we're out of time.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.